Hello everybody. So I wanted to give you a brief review on adding and subtracting integers. And the biggest thing I want to go over with you today is that when you're adding integers, you don't change anything within the problem. Now when you're subtracting, that's when you're going to apply the add the opposite rule. Okay, but when you're adding, you don't change anything within the problem. So let's look at a couple of examples. So let's say we're adding, we have -8 plus 3. Okay, so we're adding a positive and negative. So we don't change any of the signs for adding in the problem. Now, because we're adding a positive and a negative, we actually subtract, right? 8 minus 3 is 5. And then we keep the sign of the bigger number. So we have 8 and 3. Which number is bigger? The 8, right? So our final answer is a -5. But notice we didn't change anything within the problem because it was an addition problem. Okay. Another example, let's say we have -9 plus a -7. Okay. Well, again, I look in between the problem. It's an addition problem. That's the first thing you want to do is look in between the problem and know what kind of problem it is. So I'm not going to change anything within the problem. So since we're adding two negatives, we're just going to add them up and keep it negative. So 9 plus 7 is 16. And since they're both negative, it's a -16. Okay? Now let's look at another example. Let's say we have -11 minus a -4. Well, now we're subtracting. So big difference here. Now we have to use the rule add the opposite. So we make the minus sign into a plus sign, and we change the -4 to a +4. So we did change the problem because it was a subtraction. So we want to take all the subtraction problems that are not basic subtraction and make them into an addition problem. So now we have -11 plus 4. So because we're adding a negative and a positive, just like the first problem, we're going to subtract, right? Keep the sign of the larger number, which is the 11. So it's going to be -7. Hopefully you're seeing a difference there. Let's say we have -27 minus 14. So again, look at the problem. This is a subtraction problem. If we look in between the two numbers, there's a minus sign, right? So we are going to apply the rule adding the opposite. So we're going to make this negative to a positive and change the positive 14 to a -14. So we made the subtraction problem into addition. Now we can use our rules for adding. So we're adding two negatives, so we're just going to add them up and keep it negative. 7 plus 4 is 11, carry the 1. 2 plus 1 is 4, so 41. And since they're both negative, it's going to be a -41. So again, the key thing there is it was a subtraction problem, so we made it into addition. But now let's say we have 25 plus a -16. Well, look at what type of problem it is. Addition. So we don't change anything within the problem. Okay? Now to get our answer, since we're adding a positive and a negative, we're going to subtract off to the side. 25 minus 16, we're going to have to borrow here, right? But we do get 9. And we subtract, keep the sign of the bigger number. 25 and 16. Well, 25 is bigger. It's a positive, so we keep this a +9. So that's the biggest thing, guys, okay? So let me actually go over one more example with you. Let's say we have 87 minus 5. Now, this is a subtraction problem, right? You could apply the rule adding the opposite if you want to. But this is just basic subtraction like you did in elementary school because we have a larger positive minus a smaller positive. So you could just subtract it and you don't have to worry about adding the opposite if it's basic subtraction only. And you do get 82, right? But let's say you didn't recognize, since we're working with positive and negative numbers, let's say you didn't recognize this was basic subtraction, right? Well, let's say you added the opposite. So we add, right, the opposite. So now we have 87 plus a -5. Well, guess what? When we're adding a positive and a negative, we still would subtract and then keep the sign of the larger number, which would be the 87, so we still get positive 82. But just a point there, when you have basic subtraction, you can just do your math. Basic subtraction is when we have a larger positive minus a smaller positive. But if you didn't recognize that, you could add the opposite and still get the correct answer. So addition problems. Don't change anything within the problem. So again, addition problems, you don't change anything in the problem. You just apply your rules. So if you're adding two positive numbers, let's say, and the circle would be your operation, that's going to be a positive. If you're adding two negative numbers, that's going to be a negative. And if you're adding a negative and a positive, well, then you got to subtract and then keep the sign of the larger number. Okay? Now, for subtraction, unless it's basic subtraction, you make sure you add the opposite, which is you're changing two things. You're changing the minus sign in between the two numbers to a plus sign, and you're changing the sign of the second number. When you apply adding the opposite, guess what? In one step, you're making the problem addition, okay? So again, I know I said a bunch of times, but I just want to make sure you got this down. For addition problems of integers, don't change anything in the problem. Subtraction, you do want to change the problem by adding the opposite. Unless it's basic subtraction, then you wouldn't have to do that. So thank you very much. Hopefully this video lesson was helpful and this review was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know in class or send me an email. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day, everybody.